yeah, thank you very much, everyone who's turned up to this first continuous delivery meetup, and also a special thanks to Nine and Thomas and
Nick,
who've offered to host and present. And yeah, hopefully we can have a few more of these soon enough. So I'll hand over to Nick to introduce the presentation.
Thanks. So yeah, hi there, I'm Nick, as already said, and I want to talk about deployments with Argo CD in a Kubernetes environment, as you might have expected. I want to talk first, because I need to stretch it as well a bit, right? About classic deployments, right? Like the old days where we just had a real server and maybe PHP or whatever app on it. Then going to containerized deployments, talking a bit about GitOps, and then from GitOps to Argo CD, and at the end I also want to have present an example. Yeah. So classic application deployment, I want to talk about environments. So at least what I always know is many companies have a dev, a staging, and a production environment. Maybe there's also acceptance or whatever, or however you want to call it, environment. Yeah, some of them you're using a single server per environment, or you basically set it up your own and very manually. At least from my previous company, I worked at Fashion Days before. Adding and managing environments involves quite some work. We basically had 6 development environments, and then there was basically a development manager who assigned features to environments. So one could basically take a whole environment for that feature. And when they asked us to add more, and we need to add more servers, and it actually was quite hard. Especially, let's imagine you want to add another dependency, or you want to develop on a new PHP version or whatever. So yeah. Classic application deployment, which methods? So I'm pretty sure I forgot a few, but I already, when you talk to people, some people just copy stuff. If you have a very, very simple app, SCP, FTP, rsync, whatever. Some of them are using Ansible scripts to copy and control their deployment. Some of people are building Debian packages or RPM. Those are the really brave, I'd say. Yeah, because Debian packaging, at least what I know, is not so easy. We at Fashion Days used Capistrano and Webistrano. I think that's not actively developed anymore, but it was actually quite cool. Especially Webistrano as a UI, you basically said, okay, deploy now that tag on that environment, and it started. It deactivated the load balancer, like nodes in the load balancer, and copied code, and was quite okay. And then there are especially self-written shell scripts and commercial products as well. Self-written shell scripts, I guess, are really, really, I don't know, widely deployed in companies. At least when you talk to possible candidates, like for jobs, most of them actually tell you, yeah, we're just using a bash script. Yeah, and in the end, they all want to copy code and maybe restart an application or empty and cache. So actually, they all want to do the same, but we have very, very many possibilities there. And the issues with it are as well quite big, I'd say. Especially when I used Ansible, there were sometimes SSH issues if you have a rate limit or whatever. Then speed issues, even with Capistrano and Webistrano, when we used it. A deployment took, I don't know, like 20 minutes or something like that. So really, really long, at least in my perception. Sometimes you had permission issues. Again, Debian packaging issues because you have to build it. And missing dependency, that's also something I encountered quite a lot. Some developer had the missing dependency installed on its local environment. They went to production, and then the exceptions were like falling like rain, I'd say. Yeah, so maybe we should use something else. And then we came to containers. And containers, I guess most of you are engineers, right? So you know all the advantages. It provides everything as one unit. You need just to copy one thing, like the container image, basically. You should have a consistency between dev environment and production. And environments are actually easier to set up. I'm not yet using Kubernetes, for example, on my private server. I'm still fiddling around with normal Docker and using systemd to start the containers. Yes, that's old-fashioned. But it works, and even setting up environments there is really easy, I'd say. For me, it's copying a systemd service, and that's it. And you can revert changes quite fast. You should just use the previous image if it's compatible with all the other stuff you have around. Yeah, managing containers without an orchestrator is hard. If you do it like me in a very, very small fashion, then it's okay. But if you do it for a real company, then it's really hard. So yeah, we need a container orchestrator, and yeah, besides Nomad, there's Kubernetes, I'd say. Yeah, you can basically run the workload in namespaces, which I always say is the best to have an environment. I always put an environment equal as a namespace. And controllers operators take care of the workloads. You basically just say, hey, I want that app 2 times, 3 times running, and the controllers are taking care of that. You have RBAC for authorization. And the really cool thing is that it actually abstracts the nodes a bit. It spreads all the workloads over the nodes. You have a production namespace, and then you basically can say, okay, let's imagine that is a node pool for production. So you say, okay, I'm using pod affinities to that node pool, and my production pods are running on the production node pool, and all the others are running on that single node pool, which you shouldn't do, or yeah, but many people are doing it. And that's basically also a cool thing. It abstracts the nodes away. Yeah. Actually, who of you is using Kubernetes already? Okay, cool. Yeah, deployments in Kubernetes. Everything is configured via the API server. I mean, back in the container and the classic deployment application, classic deployments, we had multiple methods of copying stuff. And here, actually, I think it's really cool. You need to go via the API server. Everything is persisted in etcd at the end, but you have basically one possibility to find this stuff. And you have a predefined set of YAML resources already. I think for 90% of applications, at least the applications we have to work with on a daily basis, a deployment, a service, config map, and ingress and secrets are enough, I'd say. That's what I encountered. And you have that by default. You don't need any CRDs or whatever additional possibility. And yeah, you basically define what should be running, and the controllers make sure that it happens, or at least they should, right? Back in the old days, if during the deployment, if something crashed, you need to start it over, basically again, or first you need to define what went wrong, and then you need to fiddle in the deployment. That was not so cool, I'd say. Yeah, and the whole thing is extensible with CRDs and operators controllers, which is also very cool and extensible. Yeah, one way of configuration, and it especially allows for high level of automation and integration because it's an HTTP API, right? And then you can actually talk HTTP from many places, I'd say. Yeah, typical resources. I think I talked a bit already about it. Deployment, those of you who already know Kubernetes, I mean, that's a bit boring for you now, but yeah, deployment, basically, you specify the image, the amount of replicas, and you also say which config map should be mounted where, or secret. Then you have the pod, right, which is I'd say the smallest unit in Kubernetes, where your workloads are actually running, your containers. That's application related. You have service and ingress, which is network related, so you don't actually need to fiddle anymore with Nginx Apache configuration. For me, I think it's really easy. You just define the ingress, you define the host name, maybe a secret for the TLS certificate, which cert manager should create afterwards. You have config map and secret, which is also really cool. If you have a config map, you mount it in the deployment to a certain location, and someone looks at that deployment, the guy immediately knows, hey, that file is important for the application. Whereas in the classical environment, I'd say, yeah, do you really know which files the application needs? I mean, that's, yeah, okay, ls off maybe. But yeah. And then you have persistent volume claims for storage. If you have a really simple app, actually you don't know that, or you don't need it. But yeah, some people do. Yeah. Deployments in Kubernetes. When I talk to people, most of the times, actually, it's either they already use a templating or framework language, right? Or they just have plain YAML files. They put in the directory and then kube control apply. did our whole directory. And that's interesting and okay-ish, but there's no automation or traceability with that. Most of the times the developer basically does it from its own laptop, or maybe you do it from a pipeline, then I guess it's a bit better, yeah. But there's no real log, I'd say. And that's where GitOps comes into play. Any one of you, or does everybody know what GitOps actually is? Okay, I see nodding heads. Yeah. Because I actually don't know if that's all. Yeah, for us at 9, it's basically we control the whole deployment via our Git provider, which is GitLab. We are using GitLab, we have pipelines configured, we are using Terraform, we're building Terraform modules, and we especially test Terraform modules. And then we roll them out. And basically, yeah, we use pipelines and integrations for this. And besides the application code for GitOps, there's also the application configuration in Git. And that's something I think which might be new. So not only your code of the application goes into Git, but you also have like a specific configuration. And in that configuration Git, the state, or let's not call it state, but yeah, all the YAML or resources which your application needs are defined. Yeah, and we have an audit log. And then that's your Git history, because everything is a Git repo, and GitOps actually relies on Git, as the name implies. It's really cool. Something like a simple example: pushing to the development branch deploys my new app in the development environment. If that's actually you just push and it gets deployed, that's cool. You don't need to click somewhere else. So Argo CD. What is Argo CD? Argo CD has a nice logo, as you can see. And it's also a declarative GitOps continuous delivery tool for Kubernetes that's shamelessly copied from their public website. It runs in Kubernetes itself. And as I already said, it watches a Git repo, a configuration Git repo. And whatever you define inside there, it tries to apply to the cluster. It's actually similar to an operator. You read something, it knows which state you want to apply, and then it applies it to Kubernetes. To Kubernetes namespace. And it supports configuration management tools like Helm, Customize, JSONnet, and normal plain YAML. We at 9, we're using Helm, actually, but yeah, we just started with it. We have some experience and knowledge with it, so we stay with it. It provides a web UI and a CLI, and also some metrics. Web UI is actually quite cool. I'm not the UI fan, but that one is quite cool. How does it work? Yes, I already told you about the application configuration Git. Can either be a Helm chart, customized files, plain YAML, or JSONnet. And the last point, I think it's the most important. You can do that, but you don't have to. We do automated changes in the Git config directory. That's actually what we do. In the application code directory, you have a pipeline, and that pushes a commit to the config Git repo whenever there's a new version to be deployed. That's actually different from Flux, which is a different tool. I think there are only 2 prominent tools on Kubernetes for continuous deployment or continuous delivery. That's Flux and Argo CD. And I think Flux watches tags on container registries. So if there's a new tag called prod-version, it can automatically deploy that. And with Argo, that's not the case. It might be later when they join. But for now, it actually just watches the config repository, and then it applies that to the cluster. Architecture, yeah. Again, application code repo builds the image. Is that actually big enough? Because some people are. Yeah, it builds the image, it pushes the image to a container registry, and then it also, in a pipeline, changes the image version via YAML in the config repo. Argo CD watches the config repo and applies the config to the namespace in the Kubernetes cluster. And if you want, you can also change the config repo manually. I actually have that nice tool here, right? I can basically show it like this. But you don't have to. And that's also important, because you can adapt the workflow to your company processes. It might be that there's a there are developers are only responsible for application code development, and someone else is actually responsible for which version runs on production. And then you actually don't need that automatic change, that automatic pipeline change in the config repo. You can also say, hey, in the pipeline, you just create a merge request or pull request, whichever GitLab provider you use, Git provider you use. And then someone else basically merges that. That's also possible. I was recently at a company, and that guy actually in front of me who was sitting there in front of me said, no, we have actually outsourced our developers. They should not change whatever's running on production. I'm the boss. Yeah, and that's also something, we will see the configuration repo in a few minutes. You can either use branches or directory to separate the environments. So you have a config repo, right? And then you can either have a dev branch, a staging branch, and a production branch, and have your stuff inside there. Or you use directories and just have one branch. As I'm not a big fan of long-running branches, I prefer the directory way. But I mean, yeah, merging there is not so easy. It's easier if you have different branches, but it can also go, yeah, I think it's more stable. If I'm in a directory, I know, okay, I'm working now in that environment, and if you merge branches, sometimes shit happens. The configuration directory gets checked every 3 minutes by Argo CD, but if that's too slow, right? Everybody wants to be fast. You basically define a webhook in your configuration directory. So whenever there is a change, the webhook notifies Argo CD, and Argo CD will check the current state of your config repo. That's what we do. Yes, so we're already example, faster than I expected. That's what I actually propose here. Normally we have a config repo and application code repo, so I already told you. What I do is I'm also having a Helm chart repo. So I'm developing the Helm chart in its own repo. I'm pushing the packaged Helm chart, pushing the packaged Helm chart to Chart Museum, and the config repo basically references that Helm chart. You can also put the Helm chart directly in the config repo, but then, yeah, and I mean, doing Helm chart changes, I don't know. I feel more confident if I'm doing it, if I'm having it totally separated. And because here I can play around and I know nothing goes wrong on production or staging or wherever. And then if I'm done with my new Helm chart, I'm just referencing the new version here, push, and Argo CD will apply it. Yeah. Let's play a bit already. Does that work? Okay. So I prepared just 3 repositories, as I've just shown. Example business site is example business site. It's just a small Golang web server which just displays a static page. We have the chart because I like to have the chart in my own repository, and we have the configuration repo. And we have Argo CD. So is that actually big enough? Oh. Yeah. Let's make Argo CD first because it's a GUI. People like it. Right. So the example website I built is called Glissando. I wanted to stay in the container space, and they're actually selling recycling containers. So that's the idea. Very creative, I know. So I have a Glissando dev, Glissando prod, and Glissando staging. What you can see here is a so-called Argo CD application, right? I created a Glissando project. A project in Argo CD is basically a container for multiple applications. You basically, you put multiple environments or specific environments into one project. It's only helpful, I'd say, first for searching, which I can't see here now, because I guess I made it too big. Yeah, because here you can, for example, say, okay, default, and then I click Glissando, and then I can see that. And then, yeah, you can see the status. The repository is always the same as my config Git repository, but I'm using different directories there. That's why I can also specify target revision master. And yeah, I'm deploying in the same Kubernetes cluster as Argo CD is deployed. You can actually deploy Argo CD in one cluster and then control deployments in a different cluster. That's possible. Yeah, and there's a namespace, Glissando Dev, Glissando Prod, and Glissando Staging. Yeah, so if I open Glissando Dev, right, it's very beautiful, I think. You can see, basically, it's cool because you just define the ingress, and if you click on that, oh, my mouse cursor is not mirrored. If you click here on that, it actually opens just the page which is defined in the ingress, which is quite cool. So if you go on to Glissando Dev, that's also something cool. It actually shows you the objects in the namespace. So you have the application, most left. You have a service account, the deployment, and then you have replica set. And then I specified I want to have 2 replicas running of Glissando Dev. And there's also Let's Encrypt certificate. That's not by default, but if you have Cert Manager, actually it shows that as well. Oh, sorry. And yeah, so if I'm now in Glissando Dev, you can see there are 2 pods. The cool thing is you can also delete pods from the interface. And that's really cool because the controller immediately spawns a new one. That's Kubernetes. Let's go. Yeah. So if I go now to the configuration repository, right? Config repository. I just have my 3 directories. Going to, oh really? I logged in today already. Yeah, that's...
Security. Yes, it's doing it right.
Thanks. Okay, hello. Okay. So every directory content actually looks almost the same. You have a chart YAML, basically, because every directory itself contains a Helm chart. Although I'm just referencing a different Helm chart, theoretically or technically, that's also a Helm chart. And you can see that in the requirements YAML. That's a feature of Helm, basically. I'm just referencing example business side version, whatever, from Chart Museum apps. And then I have a values YAML that's really small. I know normally Helm applications are way bigger, but I have a replica count and I can configure the ingress. So basically the host name where my application will listen to. If I go there, edit, and we do a replica count of 4 now. Actually not used to the web UI of GitLab, but maybe that works. Okay. We're going back. That is also interesting because Firefox sometimes has issues. Refreshing. Now it's noticed out of sync, right? Synchronization takes part, and it spawns 4 pods. That's really cool, I think. Yeah. So then we can, I don't know. I think the Helm chart is not so interesting, right? I mean, it's a simple one. Does everyone know what a Helm chart actually is? I see nodding heads. I see people not reacting at all. Seems to be fine. Seems to be fine. Yeah. So I think in the implementation, yeah. I want to talk a bit about the pipeline. Because, yeah, that's how I configured it so far. In the application code repo, right? If you commit in a branch that starts with dev hyphen, it automatically goes to the development environment. If you commit into the master branch, it goes to the staging environment and using the tag latest. Here it's using dev. And if you do a specific tag version, blah, 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 then it goes to the production environment. And that's actually I think, everything you need. Where is my, example business site, GitLab CI. can make that a bit bigger, right? So I just have my normal stages, and that's just GitLab CI syntax. I lint, I test, I build, and I deploy. And then what I especially like is to have a template, right? So something which I can just reuse. I build. We are using Canico to build stuff. I recently looked into other solutions, but so far I think Canico is the easiest to use. You basically just say context, like the context when you use Docker build. You specify the Docker file, and Canico basically builds and pushes in one go. So you just have the destination, which is we push everything to the GCR registry, Docker image and Docker image version. And then I just call basically that same template over and over. When I push to staging, I say, okay, only do it on master and use Docker image version latest. And yeah, same for def and prod. In prod, I'm just using the CI commit tag. That's an environment variable you have from GitLab. There's just a tag which you pushed inside. Is that so far? Okay, see nodding heads. Golang lint. We lint Golang code. We test with go test. And then basically deploying. That might be a bit ugly to some people. But that's actually copied from the official, I think it's from GitLab actually. Because the only way I found to do a commit from one repo to the other is via SSH. You have those, yeah, I can see that. Normally you have those deploy tokens, which you can easily use. But so far in GitLab, they're only for reading, not for writing to a different repository, which is not so cool. That's why you need SSH, and yeah, that might be a bit ugly, but it works. Yeah, famous sentence, right? But it works, and then the solution stayed for a couple of years. Yeah, I'm basically just activating my Google account. Then I'm getting the image digest. Because as you have seen on the dev environment, I'm always using the dev image, always the dev tag. And normally, you don't have anything to change for Kubernetes, right? You build in your dev image, but in the deployment of Kubernetes, nothing changes. It stays with the dev tag. So Kubernetes will not redeploy your application. That's why I like to use digests, because they always, they differ, they're unique. And then, yeah, I'm cloning the configuration repo. And then I'm using YQ. That's just for small, if you want to change a YAML file, YQ is really cool because you can just say, okay, YQ write in place, you specify the YAML path and the new value. So you don't need to fiddle with sed or whatever. YQ is really handy. I'm adding it, I'm committing, and I'm pushing to master. And that's actually it. And that's again a template, right? You can see that because it starts with a dot deploy underscore template. And then I'm using it for every environment. Deploy to development, I'm extending the deploy template. I say, okay, deploy please to development, which is my directory in the config repo, and use that deploy image tag. Same for staging, but with the latest tag. And for production, there's a small change. It's just when manual. So when I push the tag to production, actually I need to click somewhere and say, now please deploy to production. So that the guy from the previous company I mentioned, which is the boss, he's basically the guy who pressed the button then. Yeah.
Why do you have a Docker in Docker tag?
Because I had to set it up a bit faster. And that's our default runner, basically, at 9. With our 9-managed GK thingy, the product we sell, we basically deploy GitLab runners in Kubernetes itself.
But you're using Canico, so.
Sorry?
But you're using Canico, so you don't need that.
But I need a GitLab runner to do it.
No, but the GitLab runner runs.
Yeah.
And then Canico does not need Docker in Docker to build.
No. Canico doesn't need it. No. Actually, I don't know. Maybe, Phil, do we have another tag, actually, which I could use?
For what exactly?
For just using basically Canico, which is just, it doesn't need any higher privileges. It's just,
yeah. Then
yeah.
you can just leave it. Then it runs inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Normally we are using our runners on Kubernetes. Yeah, but I didn't want to deploy them to the demo cluster. I set up a demo cluster for that. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. And I wanted to add an additional environment just to do something here, right? And I think it's actually quite easy because all you have to do is you add a Kubernetes namespace. For us, because I do it on our product, we have to do an annotation. By default, Argo CD has admin permissions to the whole cluster, which is not really cool. They will change that in version 1.4. But so far, it normally has admin permissions to the whole cluster. And we didn't like that. That's why you need to annotate the namespace with a specific string. And then an operator, which we run in the back, will give Argo CD permissions on that namespace exclusively. Then you need to add the directory in the config repo, also make that full screen, and configure the application in Argo CD. Configuring the application in Argo CD, I will do it by clicky. But Argo CD itself, the applications you've seen, Clasendo Dev, prod and staging, you can have the definitions of it, the YAML definitions, because in the end it's just a manifest inside another Git repository as well. So you don't need to click. But I already have 3 Git repos. I didn't want to overwhelm anybody. That's why I'm clicking. But it's a really cool thing. That apps and apps principle is a really cool thing, because then you just go to the Git repo, you basically copy that one manifest, and you just defined your new environment or new application. And in the end, yeah, if I add a new environment, I also need to change the pipeline, right? Yeah. Okay. So, I'm not yet in the context. Preparation is everything, right? 9. Accept project. That's my demo cluster there. Can you actually gcloud container clusters list? Get the credentials of it. I'm just getting kube context for that cluster. Kubernetes. You can already see on the top Clasendo Dev prod and staging. So create, let's say, Clasendo acceptance. KC annotate. Actually, always forget what is it. NS sendo acceptance 9ch equals true. Okay, so now Argo CD basically has access to that namespace. We need to add the directory in the config repo. I will do it via the CLI. Git repos example business site config. Can already see you have those. Oh, sorry. I have the directories there. Basically, can say copy -r. Let's say development to acceptance. And do I need to change anything? Yeah. I need to change the host name, because otherwise I might run into problems. Replica count 1. Basically, the app's customer domain is a wildcard domain. Basically, we provide by default. You can use it for testing. That's why I'm using that. It will now, because I copied the development directory, it will now deploy the development version of it, right? But the pipeline should fix that later on. Acceptance env. Okay. Now we need to configure the application. Argo CD, I got the applications. Guess I need to make that smaller again. New application. Clasendo, acceptance. Project Clasendo, sync policy, automatic and I click everything what can be clicked. I want everything. Repository, revision, master, and I say acceptance. So it already knows about the newly added directory. And the namespace is Glissando acceptance. And that's interesting. That's a bug, I think, because I'm always using two values files. There's a values YAML, as you've seen, and there's an image versions YAML. And the image versions YAML will be changed only by the pipeline. I could also go into the values YAML directly and put the tag inside there, but I don't want to risk merge conflicts. That's why image versions is the domain of CI/CD, and values YAML is for us. And then I click. I press enter. Sorry. That's interesting because if you type versions, image versions YAML, on the form before, it doesn't work. So you can also see, I mean, it's not a product which is there for 10 years or so. There are still bugs, but so far worked quite well. Creating it. Okay, bad. No such file. I did what?
You put -YAML instead of the file name is incorrect.
Of the, okay, thanks. It's cool if someone actually listens. So I guess health, where was that? Glissando, health, info, cluster, repo URL. Ah, manifest. Oh, there you go. Cannot edit in read-only editor. Ah, let's edit. Okay, save. Sync and prune and do whatever. Okay, it already synced in the back. And yeah, it's also the CM Acme thing. That's Cert Manager basically getting the Let's Encrypt certificate, and the pod is already running. And the last thing basically is to change the pipeline. Did I actually close it already? Example business site. Let's say it like this: acceptance test. And then I'm just copying stuff. Where's def? There it is. Blah, 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 blah. And let's call it acceptance. And then further down, I need to copy the deployment step. That should be actually, the last step needed to add a completely new environment. And it would actually also be possible to just say, okay, I have an environment per developer, because in the end, it's just a namespace. And yeah, doesn't take a whole server or so. Acceptance. I hope there are no typos. Oops, typo. No one has seen it. Oh, shit. Okay, that actually should be it. Let's close that. GitLab. Hello. Okay, the fan spins. GitLab is not running on the laptop. And then, yeah, it basically, yeah. Lint running test and deploy created, and in the end, it should just deploy there. And you don't, I mean, the webhook is already there in the config repo, so actually that should be fine. Yeah. Yeah, advanced topics. Actually, getting to the end already. Argo CD applications can be specified declarative. I already said it. That's apps and apps principle. Really cool. Try it out. What I don't like about that is if you have a Helm chart, and you're using a Helm chart as that, right? And with that Helm chart, you're actually templating or you're creating your apps. Okay? Then you define that config repo in Argo CD. And normally in Argo CD, you can, for Helm, you can do parameter overrides. Here, for example, if I say where I am, acceptance, I can go to the application, I can say parameters, and I can say edit replica count is 2. That's not real GitOps anymore because I'm overriding the state of Git. Or, yeah. And then basically it does the parameter overrides. That's sometimes cool. We sometimes use it for secrets. If you don't have a real secrets operator in Kubernetes, you don't want to put your secrets into the config Git because they don't belong into Git, then we did them here at least, which is also not best. You should have a secrets operator, but for development, that's cool. Yeah, it's interesting. Did I put 2? I did, right? Or didn't I do it? Something went wrong. Parameters, example, business side replica count 2. Okay. There seems to be in the back, something in the back, I'd say, which is not so.
Why do you have a warning on the, next to the 2?
The exclamation mark, that just shows you that you are overriding the parameter from Git. It's a cool feature of the UI, but it would be better if it would work as well, right? Yeah, I actually don't know. Don't know why it, except, oh yes, that's a Firefox thingy. I noticed that it works better with Chromium, but I couldn't get a performant Chromium on that laptop in my VM, so that's why I'm sticking to Firefox. And sometimes in Firefox, you need to go back to applications and then go into the application again, or refresh. Yeah, it's not best, but. Yeah, the apps and apps principle, yes. And in the apps and apps principle, if you have a Helm application, you can't do those parameter overrides on the templated applications. It actually expects everything to be in Git then. You can't do parameter overrides here. Yeah. Then there's a project Argo Rollout, which basically provides a deployment resource on steroids. It's really cool because in a normal deployment in Kubernetes, you can't really do cool like blue-green deployments, right? And Argo Rollouts has those features. You can do blue-green. You also have a preview service, for example. You deploy to your new environment. It spawns the new pods, but there's a preview service where you can watch before. And then you basically can say, okay, now roll it out, and it will turn over the traffic to the production service. So Argo Rollouts is also quite cool. You can see metrics in Grafana. Yep, that's true. Where do we have our Grafana instance? Yeah. Yeah, you have, I mean, that's the default dashboard from Argo CD, and version 1.4 they actually added more metrics, which is cool. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes, especially if you scroll to the bottom, I mean, there are so many application-related metrics which you as a developer are not really interested in. We are, because we maintain and we run it, but yeah, normally you are only interested in that. Yeah. And yeah, you can also override parameters in the Argo CD web UI. I already mentioned that. And yes, you already told me before, Argo CD and Flux, the most prominent tools, they actually joined forces. Weaveworks announced that there will be Argo Flux. So they're as well as creative as I'm with Glazender, actually. And that's really cool because I just read the blog article and they say the feature I told you before, I can monitor an image version that actually might come to Argo CD. Argo CD, I think, has way more features, so I think, I don't know, at the end, the final product might look a bit more like Argo CD than Flux, but that's just, yeah. Thanks. So, that's actually already the end. I hope I didn't forget anything. Questions? Oh, sorry, yes.
Have you run Argo with anything like Istio or similar things that allow more?
No service mesh yet. Service mesh might be actually coming this year to 9managed GK. But yeah.
Curious how, if there are any experience with, because it allows you to do more intelligent traffic routing if you're trying some new features out and things like that. So.
But what is it using? The normal deployment resource or just a CRD resource? I think it's an own resource, right? And then with Argo CD, actually, you can also configure external resources or additional resources. As you've seen, it marks the single objects as if they are ready or not. If they are green, they are ready. If they are red, they are not ready. And you can actually define how it should find it out for CRDs. Right? There's a small section in the config where you have you have actually a programming language available to find it out. I don't know what it's using actually. Okay. Any other question? People told me in the beginning, yes, I was expecting.
I was waiting. I was like being nice. But
yeah.
Isn't like, I understand Argo CD is supposed to be GitOps implemented.
Yeah.
But doesn't that change the whole concept? Because GitOps, you would have your project, your application with your chart or your actual values that get applied to a cluster within the same repository.
Mm-hmm.
And then, since you're using already GitLab with a pipeline, you would apply that directly as an additional step, rather than doing the weird SSH into another repository to create a push. Like, you're doing GitOps, yes, but your actual GitOps is not part of your application, it's part of your configuration.
And they should be separated. Actually, wait. I will open the page. Argo CD, best practices, because that question comes often and I can't remember all the things. Separating config versus source code repositories. There's a whole section about it. Just a clean separation, and especially what I like is, I think, automating CI pipeline. If you want to push to yourself in a pipeline, that's actually could be a bit weird, because then you're triggering another pipeline because you just pushed to it. So that's why they actually also like to separate config and code. And it's also in terms of permissions, right? What I said before, your application developers just have access to the code, but not to the configuration. They don't define what's running live.
Okay, maybe we should just I think configuration is a very large topic.
Yeah,
because
maybe.
In my head, it's like you would have your tag, which is on your server, but that is not actually in your repository. That gets triggered by your operator that is running in your cluster, which is actually similar to Argo then. Yeah, maybe just configuration is, Some people are referring to the state of the application, but I'm not sure if the state is actually a real good word for that. You just define all the YAML resources in one config repo. That's it. Yeah, clean audit log and whatever. there's a page for that. Any other question? Oh, yes.
Did you also create pull requests from your pipeline?
What do you exactly mean?
So if you open the pull request for change on production, so someone can approve it. Yeah,
that's
just make
that's possible.
Roll out by approving pull request.
Yeah, you actually don't need to really change it. You actually need to clone it. You need to change it, the Git repo, right, in a branch, for example, and then you can additionally open up a pull request or merge request. We're actually doing that for one customer.
You're doing this? With GitLab?
Yes, with GitLab. You actually, but then with GitLab, you actually need an own user for that, because you need that token to create the merge request, and that user needs to have access to the config repo.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this.
But well, it's actually, if you're struggling with that, We have a Docker image. What is it? 9 CI/CD helper. I think it's on 9ch/CI/CD helper. And there I actually wrote a script, create merge request, where you just pass arguments. And then it does it for you. Yeah. Any other question? Oh, David.
Yes, one question. If we have, say, let's assume I have my application in one Git repo,
Yep.
and I have my config in this or Helm chart in another repo.
Yep.
And I just want, let's say I'm triggering them via pipeline. So I'm moving them separately, like the application change would just trigger a Docker build,
Yeah.
and the other one would actually deploy my Helm chart, a Helm upgrade, whatever. Do that. If I have a setup like this, what would be like the advantages or what would be the pitch to move to say something like Argo?
Oh, you mean you don't want to use Argo? You just want to change your chart in your repo, and then you're using Helm in a pipeline to apply it to the cluster. Is that correct?
Let's say it's the current scenario, and you were to convince me, say, now you need to move Argo, here's why. And that why I don't get right now.
Hard. I'm not working for Intuit, so I'm not. I don't have to convince you, but now I think first there's the nice UI, right? Now if there's what I really like about the UI is that if you click on the pod, you can actually see the pod logs. I mean, we have Loki as well deployed, but for a quick look, actually it's helpful. Then you have the events in Argo CD, and you can roll back as well. Overriding the Git state, that's possible. You have a rollback button, and then you can just do it. I don't know, any other things? It's just a helper to doing it, right? Because you need to set up that pipeline and program it. Whereas Argo CD has it deployed in its operator logic.
Yeah. And it's much nicer and snappier. I mean, if I were to use a GitLab pipeline, say it would take probably longer also, like you just change the replica, 10 seconds after it's already booted.
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah.
I guess the other thing as well is if you have the separate config directory in Git, so Argo CD, in regulated environments, you can implement a fairly automated segregation of duties.
That's true. You're talking about banks. Yeah, I think it's also made for that. I mean, I think Flux works different here. I think Flux has a different concept. I think it doesn't need a config repo, it just watches the images. So it doesn't need anything else. But yeah, Argo is also quite like doing a lot of development in that regards to make it easier. Because for now, you always need that Helm chart, right? I think in version 1.3, you always need a Helm chart in a Git repo. And in 1.3, you're actually having the option now to just deploy a Helm chart from the public. You don't need that config repo anymore. And in 1.4, RC1 came out yesterday. And yeah, there are also some cool things, but I can't remember. It was too late.
There are quite a few moving parts there. Like you need to know the CI/CD part.
Yeah.
Not Jenkins. The GitLab CI.
Yeah.
And you need to know the Argo CD stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Can you not get rid of the GitLab CI?
Oh, but I need somehow, well, I can just say, okay, I don't want to have it automated. There is someone who does the change manually.
You commit. That's the change.
Yeah, but you commit in your application code and not in your config repo, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I could also, I could just say, okay, there's no automated pipeline. A developer tells me when he has built a new version, I'm going to the config repo and doing the change manually. Possible. I don't need that pipeline, but I mean, nowadays you strive for automation where possible. Let's say. And we here like automation very, very much. We're only a few people.
I totally understand, but if you just take the old school Jenkins, just one Jenkins, that's it.
And then you do kube control apply basically in Jenkins.
For example,
yeah.
Keep it simple.
You can do it as well like that. It's just another tool. I mean.
Yeah. No, it's not one tool. It's a few tools.
Well, it's your Git provider and Argo CD.
The repo, Helm chart repo, and
you need a configuration, yes, but you also need that configuration in Jenkins, right? You need to know which YAMLs your application needs to have.
Yeah, I mean, of course. Yeah.
And you don't need a Helm chart actually. You can just put your YAML directly there and use, I'd say, YQ in a pipeline or manual. it's up to you. I mean, yeah. Silence. Thank you. I forgot the "we are hiring" page here. Sorry. Yeah, if you're interested in Kubernetes and Golang, yeah, come and talk to us. We are hiring. Thanks.